بخیر ماهرش مینت گداو گوکشره بخیر ماهرش مینت گداو گوک سوشیرو هیرو یو هیرو هیرو Nueta tsokto mankere de nini da he de ki wadora ho shere bohere mohere shminat gadao go su shero hero yo hero hero.
Okay, thank you all for being here. We're really excited about this panel to talk about women in the tribal college movement, past, present, and future. I think it's really important for us to just make sure that when we tell the story of the tribal college movement, we tell it from all perspectives, all sides, from a prism that is inclusive of everyone. So we're really thrilled that you all are here to talk with us today. So I'm going to briefly introduce everyone, and then I have some guided questions for each one of you, and then we'll kind of open it up and have a dialogue. Okay. So first, Dr. Twyla Baker is president of Nueta Hidatsa Saanich College in Newtown, North Dakota. She's an enrolled member in the 3 affiliated tribes, Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara Nations. She was born and raised on the Fort Berthold Indian Reservation. Prior to leading in NHSC, she was director of the National Resource Center on Native American Aging in Grand Forks, North Dakota, where she also co-founded the North Star Council. The council's mission is to strengthen and empower Indigenous people through research, education, and community development with a focus on American Indians in northeastern North Dakota. Next, Dr. Sandra Boham. She's a lifelong educator who's worked across the education spectrum. She taught in a women's prison, a Job Corps site, and mainstream colleges. She worked at Salish Kootenai College first in its early days, and later she ran the college's Gear Up and Trio programs. After earning a doctorate in educational leadership from the University of Montana and working again at mainstream colleges, she came home to SKC as an administrator. She has served as president of SKC since 2016. Throughout her life and career, one thing has remained constant: her identity as a Salish and Kootenai tribal member. Selena Gray is Blackfeet, Chippewa Cree, and a senior at Salish Kootenai College, where she's pursuing a bachelor's degree in wildlife and fisheries. She was a 2017 Udall Scholar, an SKC Native Science Fellow, a College Fund Student Ambassador, and she serves as the Northwestern representative for the AX Student Congress. She was recently accepted into the very competitive master's program at the University of Montana in wildlife. So we're really proud of you for that. Selena is also a student blogger at the Tribal College Journal, where she pens a column, Twin Aversities. I hope I pronounced that right. Life of a Tribal College Mom. She's a mother of twins. Dr. Janine Pease is an enrolled member in the Crow Nation. She holds undergraduate and advanced degrees from Montana State University. Since 1971, she has held several different positions, faculty and administrative positions, serving at Eastern Montana College, Rocky Mountain College, and most important to us and to this panel, at Fort Peck Community College and Little Bighorn College, where she was the founding president from 1982 to 2000. Janine has served on the Montana State University System Board of Regents and as a cabinet head for education for the Black Eagle administration of the Crow Nation from 2010 to 2012. And she was awarded the prestigious MacArthur Fellowship in 1994. A lifelong advocate for American Indian voting rights and indigenous language revitalization, Dr. Pease administers the Chickadee Lodge Immersion School and coordinates summer Crow language revitalization programs. So, an extremely impressive panel of very strong women today. So as I said, we're going to have this kind of make it a discussion, a roundtable discussion, but I have some guided questions for each one of you. And we're really thrilled that this panel is being filmed by the Tribal College Journal, and it will be featured on the tribalcollegejournal.org website as part of the TCJ's web exclusive offerings for its summer issue, which is about tribal college women. So I'm going to start with Dr. Pease. As you well know from your experience, women have played a tremendously important role in the tribal college movement since its beginnings. How have you seen that role change over time, and how do we ensure, as I mentioned when I started, that the prism through which we view the tribal college movement is inclusive, and that we hear the stories from the perspective and experiences of women as well as men?
Well, I think that we have an amazing number of tribal colleges that are serving tribal communities that come from the matriarchal tradition. And that, in particular, of course, the Crow, the Hidatsa, the Dene, there are very strong women's roles. Women are always strong in, of course, the education of their families, of their children throughout the generations. So I think that we start as a movement with some very, very strong, articulate, highly educated women. When I entered the tribal colleges, my first job was with Dene. I was a counselor of the women's dorm there in 1972, which is long, long ago. But I met some marvelous women in the course of that experience. I didn't stay there very long. Most of my experience has been with Little Bighorn College as president and working with AHEC as with my fellow presidents for those 18 years, and then in several other positions. But I do think that from our very beginning, women have held very prominent positions. And presidents, vice presidents, financial aid directors, student services deans. And so women have had really a broad and comprehensive opportunity to cast a real print on how tribal colleges are implemented in their communities. And I think that women are so deeply in touch with their communities. They're certainly tribal members. They're members at a very community base, so that they understand, I think, in their most very first person experience, the importance of families, the importance of children, and a majority of our students have always been women. I don't know that we've yet ever had a college that had a majority male student body. I don't know of that. I think the data we probably couldn't find that institution. But so, in many ways, we have been, very much represented throughout the entire look of and the operation of tribal colleges. I think, however, that in the newer generation of the experience in the tribal colleges, the demand for highly prepared, highly expert people in administration demands a huge amount. When I first was president, I came with a bachelor's degree, and I was really convinced that that was the total preparation that I needed. But it became apparent to me by 10 years in my service that there wasn't any way I could move into the accreditation field or write those accreditation documents or develop curriculum, understand the higher ed field without those advanced degrees. And that's when I moved kicking and screaming into my advanced degree. Now that sounds impossible, but from that point of view, many of the people in leadership positions entered as presidents with a bachelor's or maybe a double bachelor's and a master's. And I benefited tremendously from that advanced study. And you've got, in higher ed, you have to know the language of it. You have to negotiate among and with other institutions. So it's a very demanding field to be in. You really have to have that tremendous high level of expertise. And the way we've earned our living grant writing and understanding all of the agencies that we work with, I remember the first NSF grant I ever wrote. I thought, this is like a dissertation. It was so difficult understanding all the terminology, all the guidelines, fulfilling every single question. So I think it's become quite a bit more complex and hugely demanding in certain areas. So it's more complex because, yes, it's community-based. Almost all of us in the tribal colleges are from the communities that we serve. And yet you have that role of being so responsive and so participative with funding agencies, accreditation, and all of that. Hugely demanding in that role. So I guess that, you know, those are the things that I would mention, that it's become more complex, more demanding. So we're asking for really amazing people to step into these positions. And, but I do think there's always been room, and we've had leadership, both in AHEC, as, you know, women have been president of AHEC. I was in 1983 to 85, and Mark Campbell was president. Phyllis Howard had leadership positions, and there are many, many women who have been leaders in AHEC. I really think that's responsive to the way in which men and women operate in our communities. I mean, in terms of our tradition. At any rate, I'd like to stop there and see what other members of the panel have to say about how that role might be changing, and maybe reflect off of what I've said there.
Everyone's looking at me, so
Twyla,
yeah.
what's on your mind?
Well, I'm thinking about, because I'm essentially next gen of tribal college leadership, and there's a few of us, there's kind of like this evolution happening right now in the tribal colleges, where those of us who are in the position to be stepping into these roles are learning from the folks who came before us. And we are now taking what the tribal college movement has become, and it's becoming a new iteration, and moving our institutions into this new age. It is exactly what you say. It's a very demanding job. It's very, you have to be very responsive, you have to be pretty quick on your feet, and I find in my own position that I have to have, it's not about centralization of power within myself or anything like by any means. I don't trust my own judgment that much that I think I could have all the answers by any means. So what I do is build a team of phenomenal people who can be as responsive, who I can leave the reins with when I need to be in DC, when I need to be in Bismarck or wherever, and trust that things are going to get handled on my campus with whatever situation that you have to respond to. And I always think about other college presidents and how very different our context is, and how I don't know if other college presidents are walking down the hallway hearing auntie, grandma, you know, that type of thing, because we are so very much so embedded in the communities that we come from. And it's truly a blessing to be able to do this work with, like, my adopted mom, my Cindy Lindquist, you know, mentoring me along, with Laurel Vermillion teaching me how to do these types of things. And with my friend Leander McDonald doing what he does, and we're all learning and working together with each other, because there's just so few of us, and I feel that it's just an echo of how our cultures and our people always work. It's going to show up in the structures, these albeit Western structures that were never really built for us. It's how we're going to express ourselves as Indigenous people as we rebuild those structures to be responsive to the people that we serve, to be responsive to our young people, our elders, because we all know that our community colleges aren't just about college, they're about the community. Mm-hmm. We do so much more beyond higher education. We're a center of, you know, of a lot of different things going on, and tribal colleges become like these small heartbeats within our tribal communities, and it's something that people rally around, and it's a privilege to be able to do that type of work.
Great, thank you. I'm wondering, just one follow-up question that you were talking about your experiences and how you're learning from other tribal college presidents, some of the other women presidents, and Janine talked about her role first at Diné College at a time when there were some really strong, some of the founding woman of the tribal college movement was there at Diné College, and then you had that experience of establishing your college, Little Bighorn College. And we want to keep growing these, Selena and other leaders. So you have that first person experience, but how do you make sure that the stories, the things that you went through that empowered you to do what you did, that those lessons are there for Selena and for Selena's daughter in the future? That's what I'm really wondering, that we have this history, 50 years of the tribal college movement, and the voices of women are strong as they're leading their institutions every day. But when you look back at the documentation of the tribal college movement, I don't see or hear a lot of women's voices. So what we're trying to do is make sure we do. So
yeah, I think it's incumbent on all of us really to make a documentary record of our experience, because we can't always have access to people who may want to have that story as a means or a path to follow. About 5 years ago, I was challenged to think about the lessons I had learned in the years that I served as president, and several other roles following that. And I took up that challenge, and it's not easy to do, but I did, and I thought that I was hoping that it would be accessible, and I think that for a graduate school in higher education, probably that story is out there, but it's true. We really need to be able to do that. I think that women who were working in tribal colleges, though, are marvelously accessible. I think that we have probably the most open, wonderful scholars who share their wisdom. I certainly would never have survived if it hadn't been for people like Phyllis Howard and her experience, or Margie Campbell, and so on. And I think the tradition of being fully accessible as a leader is something that, without exception, is there. Do people who aspire to this field know that? I think we need to get that message out to people and say, call us up, ask us, we'll be ready to talk about it, because I think that leaders in tribal colleges are very accessible. I mean, I've actually never had anyone, when I started, I was the youngest president, and that was in 1982, and no one said, well, I'm not going to help you with that because you should figure that out on your own. No one said that. So whether it was Tom Shortbull or Lionel Bordeaux or Joe McDonald or Jim Shanley, they were all very, let's figure this out, let's look at this, and so on. I do think that there is a marvelous generosity among people in those positions. I don't know how we get that message out, but I think we should be able to say, yeah, ask and it shall be given.
So I don't know that Janine recognizes this, but I'm going to share it, because when I joined the tribal college movement, it was in 1979. I was 19 years old, and I started as an adult basic ed instructor. That wouldn't happen today, probably, except at a tribal college. It might. But the reason that I was able to do that was because I had a high school diploma. I was an enrolled tribal member, and I had taken some classes at the University of Montana in high school in the evenings from SKC, and I had 1 quarter completed at the University of Montana because it was a quarter system then. And what they were looking for was a tribal member with a high school degree and some college background. And I was able to get that job because there virtually was nobody available. I wish I could say it was because things are great. But I didn't have access to a lot of the tribal college leaders. I did to the Montana leaders, and that's how I came to meet Janine. And so I was like, you know, the kid that was following everybody around and listening, and I was learning a lot because Joe was very open door. He shared a lot of information, and Jerry did, and we were all kind of working together. But there were many of us that followed Janine. Not like, we didn't follow her around, but whenever we could sit and listen to her stories, we did. Because many of us that went on to become presidents later, or people who were in some level of administration in tribal colleges, found ourselves in a graduate fellowship together in Bozeman. And Janine was part of that. So we would listen to her talk about the work she was doing with accreditation and building Little Bighorn College and from the ground up. And sometimes she would talk a little bit about the boys club. And it wasn't that they excluded her, it was just that there were way more men that she had to interact with on a daily basis, which was common at that time. But we learned a lot from her about that as well, and how to navigate some of that dynamic. And so she may not realize the impact that she had on a number of, so she's a founder, she's a next gen. I'm kind of in the middle, although I'm new in the presidential role. I've kind of been around the hanger-oner forever. And then we have our future, who are our students that we serve every day. But I think that's part of what happens with women leadership, is that they are not going to say, fully acknowledge the role that they've had. And I'm going to acknowledge her.
That's my point, that thank you for doing that. Because I think, and it would be great if somehow we could get your stories of Janine and other women. So maybe I think that's how we're gonna do it. I have that figured out now, so thank you. Because that's what I want. I want to hear those stories of women and the experiences that you went through, because that's how the tribal college movement was created. That's what's gonna help the next generation and the future generations. That's what we have here, so thank you for saying that. So sort of related to that, and I think you sort of answered part of my question to you, President Boham, but let's look at women at tribal colleges and women at mainstream institutions, and you kind of hinted at some of the challenges that women faced within the tribal college movement, but we know that at mainstream institutions, because we hear a lot about this, about the glass ceiling and the challenges that women face at mainstream institutions, institutional bias, tenure, all of those things coming into leadership positions. And in fact, we also know that nationally, 5% of the presidents of institutions of higher education in this country are women of color. And 30% are women. But we know at tribal colleges, about 45%, almost 45% are women, and 100% of those women are women of color. So we're doing something that's really great there. But we know that women at tribal colleges also face challenges. So I'm wondering, how are the challenges, how do you think the tribal, or do you think there is any difference? How are the challenges that we face at tribal colleges, that women face at tribal colleges, different from mainstream institutions? And then how are they the same?
And that's kind of interesting, because I think we went through had two phases of that. And I'll talk a little bit. First, I'm going to talk about some of the predominantly or mainstream institutions. Women who work in mainstream institutions tend to have a heavier credit load than their male counterparts. They also have less collegiality between women. So mainstream institutions tend to be very competitive within the institution. So departments are competing for resources, people are competing for tenure, people are competing for their jobs in case of a rift. Sometimes there's reorganization where departments are combined, which means one of the administrators is going to be gone, so there's competition that way. And so there doesn't seem to be the sisterhood in mainstream institutions. It's structured in a very male-oriented leadership model. The leader is the one out front, taking control, making the decisions, and you may or may not be able to have input depending on whether it's invited or not invited. And it's not supposed to be, I don't think, based in sort of a corporate model, but higher education kind of took a corporate shift in the 80s. And that's when we started talking about students being consumers of their education and demanding their money's worth and what job they were going to get, which was a very different discussion that had happened previous to that about
The public good.
the public good and self-actualization and your contributions to the community.
Society.
Yeah.
And do we need things like philosophy to make the world better, and art and music and those things that aren't going to guarantee you a job at a certain rate after you get out? Yes. But there was that shift, and when that shift happened, it happened across all of academia in the way that it functioned as well. I had to write some of this down because as I was thinking about this very big question, I thought, what do you say, and then how do you say it in a way that's not so combative people will think, oh my gosh. The other thing that happens with women in leadership in mainstream institutions is they tend to be older by the time they become leaders, primarily post-child rearing. Because if you have children, then somehow you can't be a leader. And sometimes it's passive and sometimes it's not. So for example, I'll give you a very direct experience that I had where I had a young child because I waited and had one child later in my life. And there was going to be a meeting and I was looking at some promotion opportunities, and they wouldn't tell me the time until it was getting close to that, and they said, oh yes, the department has decided we can all meet at 6:30, but we understand if you have childcare issues. Well, I called my husband and said, hey, you've got to take care of the kids, I got to go to this meeting, which I did. And they were very surprised that I was there because and it was all men except me. The expectation was that I couldn't manage to be a professional woman and have my children. And so that's still there. It has not gone away. And then the other part of it is the behaviors that people tend to think are leadership behaviors tend to be that male-oriented, dominant society image of what a man leader, what a male leader is. And they ascribe that to women. So what happens often in higher education institutions is women kind of, I say, act like men. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but tend to not operate from the way that we culturally know is our way of leadership. So it's kind of a conflict. And so at the tribal college, what I have seen is that there has always been a mentorship relationship between men and women and whoever the president has been. But the women also support each other. So it's not, I'm going to do what I need to do and it might hurt your college, but it's going to make my college okay, which is the foundation of AHEC. And our leaders in the early days, the wisdom that they had, and the commitment of everybody after that to stay true to that, And I think sometimes now as we're beginning this transition to the next generation, that's a piece that we have to make sure that they hold on to. Because part of the belief in the early days was the way that our tribal college funding structure was set up, is that it was divide and conquer. And it very easily could have been that way. The colleges who were first out of the door, who built the biggest and fastest, would hog up all the resources and cannibalize the ones that weren't as strong. We chose not to do that. So we will not do that. What is in the interest of one is in the interest of all of us. And that has held for 50 years, and that's incredible. And I don't think you can overemphasize how important that is. The challenges today is that we are charged with having much more expert, prepared faculty, which means a lot of our faculty tend to be non-native. At SPC, we are really working hard to grow our own, send people to get their masters and doctorates and bring them back so that we can have native faculty on our campus. And the reason I'm saying that is part of our challenge is to decolonize our own faculty's minds, to decolonize our own administrative minds, because we've all been trained in the same educational institutions that we are trying to not be like. So the challenge is to meet accreditation and do all of those things, but not lose the soul of our tribal values and why we do what we do. And yes, we have excellent programs that have rigor, that our students excel in when they leave. But I don't think we have to be mini mainstream universities to do that. We need to stick to our core values, which is what makes us so successful. Because when our students leave our campus, they leave whole, not just as a wildlife person or a biologist, but they know who they are, they're strong in their own identity, and that makes a difference. And then the other thing about tribal colleges is there is a value in the feminine. So the leaders don't have to be the ones out front acting like men. We can function because you can lead the sides, you can lead behind, you can let someone else take on a leadership role. That doesn't diminish you. That doesn't make you weak. But that's the perception in some mainstream institutions. If you're not out there at the front, then you're not leading. When the most powerful leader in the room, you may not be able to identify right off the bat. And I think we value that in our tribal colleges. So we make room for other people to have opinions and input and help us to build. As long as we keep our core values of our tribal nations at the heart of what we do, and that we remain student focused and we meet the needs of our communities, then the path is going to be good. It's when it becomes ego-driven that people get off track and out of balance, and you see colleges struggle when the leader has kind of lost their center.
Great, thank you. Well, sort of to pick up on that and how one of the chief differences is the core values of tribal colleges and the leaders at tribal colleges, I'm wondering, President Baker, what do you think it is about the values and cultural sensibilities of Native women that lead them to become presidents of tribal colleges? And what, if any, differences do you see between Native and Western values with respect to gender and equality? I think President Bohem kind of hinted at some of that. So basically what I'm wondering is there something more, some cultural value or something that you all have in common that calls really exceptional women like all of you into the tribal college movement?
I think, well, I view myself, and speaking from the nation that I come from, we're matrilineal and matriarchal, and that's kind of embedded in the way we lived. How we recognized, and we have for generations, the inherent power that women have, and how it expresses itself, not in just the home life or anything like that, but also in our day-to-day lives, in our work lives and things. We're the life bringers, we're the life givers, and there's reference to it about women being the backbone of the people, and quite honestly, when you're thinking about colonization and how some folks, speaking for MHA Nation, they picked on the wrong gender, maybe, because we are matriarchal, matrilineal. They focus very heavily upon our men and disempowering them and taking their power away from them, when it was the women that were the owners of the seeds, were the owners of the land or of the property and things like that. And we were the knowledge keepers, and we were the ones that passed on these traditions that we had. We were literally the structure of our people. So that's where true power lies. But colonial eye sees it in a very different light. And my colleague was talking about some of it, about how the centralization of power, being in one person and having that one leadership position, and I'm the smartest, I'm the the bravest, I'm the whatever. And I was thinking about that one saying when you're talking about how if I'm the smartest person in the room, then I'm in the wrong room. It's really not so much about the centered leader, and more about the person who can delegate and who can create other leaders. That's, to me, at least my personal definition of leadership, is somebody who inspires other people to become leaders as well, because that's what we need. That's what the people need. That's what the legacy that you're going to leave behind in this leadership position is. How well is that institution going to function if you're not there? If you are gone, then what's left behind for the people? Are they taken care of? And if you're creating these other people that can come along behind you, this next generation of young people who can pick up the reins and either carry on your vision or carry on their vision, then I feel that you're doing your job. And in Indian country, Janine was making reference to the fact that she was the youngest tribal college president. I was too. That's what happens here. That's what happens in Indian country. Leadership comes for you, not necessarily when you're ready, but when you're willing. It'll come and it'll ask you to step into these roles before you feel like you're actually even prepared to do some of these things. But the fact is because there's so few of us to do the work. Okay, well, the Creator says, okay, all right, step into it. And I've been grateful for the fact that I've had mentors amongst my colleagues who kind of push me out in front and have me step into my out of my comfort zone, and with the full intent and knowledge that they're doing so because they want to develop me and my leadership skills. So I'm very grateful for that, and the sharing of knowledge and the sharing, and not keeping it all close because it's a power play or anything like that by any means. I feel that is such a key difference between, and I've worked at both institutions, in the mainstream institution and in the tribal college movement now, and I feel so much more fed, so much more nourished spiritually as my whole being doing this type of work, as opposed to what I was doing at the other institution I worked in, which was a large research institution, and it was cutthroat. It was very, very much so driven by capitalism, by commerce, by competition, that type of thing. And while I loved my colleagues there and I loved the work that I did, what I'm doing here, I feel is my calling. I feel like, and there is a space for that in the tribal college movement. There's a space for you to be who you are. I have never had to choose or walk in both worlds. I refuse to say that anymore. I don't walk in both worlds. Basically, I have the the weapons of the enemy with the letters behind my name, the PhD, the master's degree, the bachelor's degree. Now, I tell them who I am. I tell them who our people are. And now we make our way together, being who we fully are, who we always have been. So it's the fundamental difference. And there's always a back and forth. There's always kind of a negotiation. There's always those details where you're struggling from day to day. Just making our way forward, and kind of we're always still forging those new paths. And I'm so grateful for the oh my goodness, the drive and the passion and the forethought of the founders, who were, mind you, they were like 20-year-olds that were starting.
25-year-olds.
Yes, that starting the tribal college movement. And I don't know if they could have imagined what they see here at AHEC across the country with the flourishing of the tribal colleges and everything. But I'm so grateful that they did.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so thankful because I am an alumni of the institution that I'm the president of now. So I think that's all I have to share.
One of the things that Carol Davis, who's one of those founders of the tribal college movement, and definitely the founder of Turtle Mountain Community College, and one of the founders of all the tribal colleges in North Dakota, one of her pieces of advice to everyone is don't be afraid of young people, because as you get older and more protective, as you were talking about, you don't want new people coming in because you want that power. But she says don't be afraid of young people, because it was 25-year-olds who created the tribal college movement. A bunch of 25-year-olds who didn't know what they were doing who created the tribal college movement. But I think one thing that you said was really interesting about, sort of paraphrasing, but that the reason there's so many women in tribal colleges, women are the culture keepers. And as culture keepers, you're never going to keep that to yourself, because you've got to share it. You've got to share it with other people, like the next generation. So, Selena, I'm wondering, how has your tribal college accommodated you, particularly as a mother with young children, and what challenges do you think, or are there any challenges unique to women students or women parents at the tribal colleges, and how do you deal with that?
Sure. There are plenty of challenges, especially like at larger institutions. Sandra touched on this a little bit, and from the student perspective, I started my higher education at the University of Montana originally, and I think as you come into adulthood, there's always those life experiences that kind of rock your world. So like the death of a parent, or having children, things like that happen. And at larger institutions, especially being a minority and being a woman, the support systems at a larger university just really are lacking for us. And so that was my experience. I had always thought about coming to a tribal college. It's like a fallback blanket almost, but you have to go out and try things and then come home. And I like what Twyla was saying about the weapons of the enemy, because it was actually, and I think this kind of speaks to that, like the prism of how we can connect the tribal college movement later in the future is through my experiences with university faculty and staff. It was Dr. Ryan Emanuel of North Carolina State University. He told me that we have to be able to go out and scout and then come back home and use that for our people. And so after the death of my father, my first undergraduate year, I took some time off and came home, and then I decided to come back to higher education after I had my children. And so it was actually Salish Community College that like I had been applying there like every year. And I'd been, getting these acceptance letters, like, you're always kind of welcome at home. And so it wasn't even anything really for me to go back home to SKC and start when I had my children. And as I realized how comfortable I was at SKC, the amount of opportunity that there is like, it's almost overwhelming because you get used to saying yes to these opportunities. And I've said yes to so many opportunities that have really been life-changing for me. And so it's hard to start learning how to say no. Because as my children have grown and they've been living in this, cultural community of higher education where they're welcome in my internships, they're welcome in my classes. My teachers will babysit for me so that I can have date night. That's something very unique.
Totally reverse.
Yeah, that's something very unique for a tribal college. But that's the family that, becomes part of your journey. And so to recognize the people that have come before us and built that structure for us is very special about the tribal college movement, because it wasn't just us women, it was also men making those spaces for us, and that's something that continues today. In the theater, Joe McDonald, we were presenting a movie that was like the world premiere of something, and he recognized my last name and he said, "Oh, I know your dad. He actually helped us, start this college." And when he got up there, like Joe McDonald, he was like, "Here's Selena Gray. I really want to acknowledge her because her father was prominent in helping us get this college started." And my father also did a lot of work at Rocky Boy with their higher education system, and so like it's very important for us women to be able to honor our men in the same way that they honor us by making that space for us. And that's something that we don't see at higher universities, like mainstream institutions. And so it's unique too to tribal colleges. Like I have been conditioned, I feel like, to know how to protect myself when I go on to graduate school. And that's something that is different from the experience that I had at the university. Like at a mainstream institution, as a minority and as a woman, you're sought after. So you're pushed to say yes to all of these things, and yet you're removed from your community. So maybe you don't, like, if you're not calling every day home or something like that, then you might not have that bug in your ear that says think twice. Like really think twice about what you're being offered here and protect yourself and your spirit. And so that's something that I've also gained from my experience at a tribal college, is the ability to like protect myself and really think critically about where I'm going and if it's best for me and my children. And for my children to be part of that process and like seeing that's how I overcome that challenge, is like that's so motivating for them to be a part of that process and watching that.
That's great. We thank you. That's really insightful. I know you're going to do well because, as you said, you have that. You've learned how to protect yourself and to consider your family. So we have just a few minutes left. Let me see exactly. Yeah. We only have about 10 minutes left. So I have one last question, kind of looking into the future, say after you graduate from, finish your master's degree. How do you all see the role of women changing within the tribal college movement? and just in general in higher education in the United States? How do you see over time that, you know, in the next 5, 10, 15 years becoming different?
I would like to just offer a thought that in the tribal colleges, we have the opportunity to be compassionate on behalf of our students. And the reason we have that is because those students that are in our colleges are our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren. And we, I think, see them as far greater treasure, perhaps, than a product or a commodity that comes out from a corporate model. In doing that, I think we're more interested in the whole human being, the whole person, than just pushing them through a series of steps that somehow make them something called a graduate. And I can't overemphasize that, because it's just an experience I want to share with you, is that I had a student come into my Humanities 101 class and he said, you know, my grandpa took this class from you years ago. Could that be really true? Yes, I did teach your grandpa, or he was my student. And I think the treasure that our students are is so real, because on behalf of our community and our nations, this is no common, ordinary, I mean, it never would be. But I think that will continue to be hugely important to tribal colleges. So there's a compassion there. And you know, you want to see our nations go into the future. You want to see that nation as strong then as now. That's huge. So you'd never be complacent, or you'd never, you know, that young man who says, you taught my grandfather, we're in this thing together, you know, we're in this enterprise together. I mean, I don't even want to use the word enterprise, but so it's really important to think of that. And I really think that the tribal colleges can say that to higher education out there in a way that they've never had a sense. I mean, to me, it's like a musical chairs enterprise that goes on. You know, you could have a dean there who could be anyone, or you could have a faculty member there who could be anyone. That's not the tribal colleges at all. I mean, you really can't even, there's not an equivalent to be seen there. You know that? And so when I think of how you think of your birthing a child, okay, and you think of what contribution you make as a mom, as Kalahale, you have that to look forward to, and you want to see that out a century from now, 2 centuries from now. That's compassion. That's a compassion in higher education that is so unique to tribal colleges. It's so amazing, I mean, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, and it's really hopeful for the future of our tribal nations, for this nation and for the world, especially at this time when you see such lack of compassion and concern, to know that there is still a place that is creating and helping develop compassionate whole people is really hopeful for our future. Anyone else have any closing thoughts about it?
I kind of have one, and that is that the tribal colleges in Montana actually have a seat at the Board of Regents, and so they used to have one, you remember that, and then it wasn't there for a while, and so then we rattled the cage and we got one. And it's been really interesting because we're not voting members or anything, but we get to listen to all of the administrative structures that are happening. And I leave there every time going, I am so grateful for my tribal college colleagues, because what is happening in higher ed, in mainstream institutions, in some ways to me is really interesting. We have incredible women presidents that are in higher ed. I mean, we have one in Montana, Ed Cruzado, you just gotta love her. But then there's this trend happening it's at the commissioner's office, you see it in other branches of the university system, where the leaders are not from academia. They're business people who have a business background. And that is becoming almost the norm for the new presidents in mainstream institutions. While the tribal colleges are growing more women as leaders. And every year at our new student orientation, 3 times a year, we challenge that freshman class to be ready and prepared to be the next tribal college president, to be the next college dean, because there's a point that some of us are leaving. We've had people come and talk to our students, and they say that in Washington, D.C., in most of the positions that are important for Indian people that have Indians employed, the average age is 67, and they have nobody in the pipeline. We're creating those people, and the way that they're going to lead is going to be very different than the people who led before us. And so I think what I see for tribal colleges is that as long as we stay true to what we are and who we are and what we do, we are going to continue to make amazing people. And I know one of the things that Selena talked about was her children. And I remember in 1979, nobody talked about college. And we have children on our campus, child care centers. And then it became, if I go to college, and now it's when I go to college. And they're saying that in preschool. When I go to college, this is what I'm going to do. Some of them call their preschool experience their college. I have to go to college today. So we want them to be thinking about where they fit in our community. And so I think the tribal college movement is going to be stronger. I worry about our mainstream institutions because they're doubling down on a system that's already failing.
Any hopeful last words? Or
Oh, I'm just going to echo what she says. It's, that there's, I see it not just even in higher ed, because it's been there for a while, the presence of women in leadership roles, but also in the larger population. You see it with Deb Holland, with Sharice Davids stepping into her role, back home with Buffalo. In the state legislature, a lot of firsts happening, and I feel that that's just only going to continue. I also feel that there's going to be some pushback from that system that we're talking about, that is going to try to hang on to that power. But the fact is that what we are doing and what we are manifesting has been within us and on this continent before time was time. And it's not that it's a new thing, it's that it's being revitalized and finding its true place, and it's coming back to the vision of the old ones. This was intended to happen. And to me, it's kind of inexorable. We can't really get away from it. We have to have that compassion and bring those ones that might be misguided into the future with us in a compassionate way, which has always been our way. And I know there's going to be a lot of challenges there. We all deal with it every single day, living here in North Dakota, in the deep north. But the fact is that we just have to remember and remind ourselves who we are and what lives in our blood and the power that lives there, and that has always been there.
I would like to say second to that, because if you think of where our people have come from and what they've gone through, the tremendous amount of onslaught, the loss, the many things that we've gone through, yet our people have had remarkable vitality, remarkable strength and ability to come through the toughest of times. Now, a century from now, they'll probably look back at us and say, wow, what they went through, and the tough times, that we have the capacity to step up And the tribal colleges are that capacity. We are stepping up. But we're not necessarily coming up with the same thing that our people managed to survive with in 1900. No, we have the capacity to invent, to innovate, to have faith in those new eyes. Like Selena, the way she's going to see wildlife, the way my granddaughter is going to look at biochemistry and what soil has to do with the health and nutrition of our people. The new eyes that we know are going to carry us forward. I just think we have yet to see some tremendous days ahead of us. And we've hardly revived or come back to a point where we might have been in 1700 or 1600. We have that to look forward to. So the new eyes that are coming, we really have a great deal to expect. I think we have the tribal colleges can be the foundation for those new views, those new solutions, those new steps to take into the future.
Yeah, I definitely think that women, to kind of mix what the both of you were saying, are like knowledge holders and culture bearers, but life bringers, like essentially. So our roles in that is, as like mothers of this tribal college movement, are to identify who can keep it going the best and then to nurture those relationships. I don't think it's any coincidence that you yourself, Carrie, as the leader of AHEC, are in that position, because you connect people, and that's what women do through sisterhood, and we bring life to organizations and movements and people in general.
And we keep a good sense of humor.
Yeah. That's true. Well, those are great words to close by. Thank you all for being here, for participating in this panel, for sharing your wisdom and your stories. We could go on all day, and we'll have to do this again, because we haven't completely told our story. So we're going to keep doing this. So thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Go exushero hero, yo hero he hero. Nueta tsuk no makere, dinirida he teki wadora hoshere. Bohere mahere shminat garao. Go exushero here, yo hero he.